Hello, good afternoon. First of all, I wanted to say thank you to the organizing committee of this webinar for considering this work valuable for this event. My name is Victoria Padilla, and I'm going to present a work entitled Hybrid Polymeric Materials Based on Biopolymers, ZINC OXIDE, HYDROXYAPATITE with potential use for bond regeneration. The following work is aimed at the design of fibrous materials with antibacterial and bioactive properties based on biopolyesters, specifically polylactic acid and polyhydroxybutyrate, using a high-performance technique called force spinning. This work was developed with resources from Research Centers of Applied Chemistry, SICA, from Mexico, and the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, UTRGV, from US. Materials made from polymeric fiber has been gaining space in the area of tissues engineering, basically due to its similarity with different tissues of human body. In the area of tissues engineering, different disciplines converge with the purpose of designing material to mimic the extracellular matrix of tissue and thereby stimulate its regeneration. The material should have a large enough surface area to allow cell adhesion and proliferation, with an interconnected part structure for cell migration. They should be manufactured with biodegradable and biocompatible material, referring to not producing a toxic response to cellular tissue before and during the material degradation process. Finally, its processing must be easy, otherwise it could be very complicated to design the material with appropriate characteristics. Material developed based on polymeric fibers has been widely studied in this area and have presented potential results to be used in different tissues. For example, valves, small intestine, tendons, muscle, bone, among others. In relation to the bone tissue, the hydroxyapatite has been widely used basically because the bone structure is constituted by collagen fiber mineralized with hydroxyapatite. This fat becoming an excellent candidate for the design of composite material for the bone regeneration. For this reason, hydroxyapatite is a ceramic material widely used in applications related to bone tissue. It has excellent biocompatibility with bone, teeth, skin, and muscle. Regarding their bioactive properties, in vitro and in vivo, a study has confirmed that these materials participate in key mechanisms for the successful performance of an implant. They induce orthogenic differentiation, that is autoinduction, promote the both growth at the superficial level, that is osteoconduction, and allow the growth and integration of bone tissues, that is osseointegration. On the other hand, zinc oxide is an inorganic material with a proven antibacterial properties against different pathogens. It has become a viable alternative for the development of antibacterial materials, mainly due to its low cost of production and easy control of morphology. It is important to know that both morphology and particle size play an important role of antimicrobial activities of zinc oxide. In this sense, a good antibacterial performance has been reported for spherical morphology and nanometric dimension. Regarding the zinc oxide bioactive properties, it has been reported that zinc oxide have a selective toxicity for bacteria with a minimal effect on human cells. The following figure shows in the upper part the antibacterial effect of zinc oxide on E. coli and its aureus strains, where it's evident that at a concentration of 5 millimolar, there is a 100 inhibition of bacteria. However, it is not observed a proportional decrease in the viability of loop cells. In addition, it has been shown that zinc oxide exerts an osteoconductive and osteoinductive effect on mesenchymal cells. The figure shows that the presence of zinc ions significantly increase the expression of genes related to the osteoblasts, such as collagen 1, bone morphogenetic proteins, translation factors, and induced differentiation of mesenchymal cells in osteoblasts, osteopostin, that is the bone matrix protein synthesized by osteoblast cells, and vascular endothelial growth factor. There are different techniques for the production of polymeric fibers, but the most widely used is electrospinning. A little information related to the hybrid materials similar to those that are addressed in this research work has been obtained through the electrospinning technique. However, the technique of spinning by centrifugation has not yet been vastly explored in this context, which opens the possibility to establish an understanding of the characteristics of this material under the influence of parameters and conditions of these technologies. These technologies, as you can see in the pictures, utilize centrifugal force instead of electric film for the fiber production. Therefore, there are no specific needs for using conductive fluids. The most relevant advantage is related to the process yield. It has been reported at 50 grams per hour at lab scale and hundreds of meters per minute at industrial scale, and lower operational costs since there is no need to electric field. Based on the first spinning advantages and hydroxyapatite and zinc oxide properties, the aim of the project was to produce antibacterial bioactive fibrous material based on biopolyesters, zinc oxide, and hydroxyapatite by the first spinning technique. Additionally, to evaluate the interaction of the developed fiber mat with osteoblast cells and bacteria for their potential application in tissue engineering. The therapeutic properties of this kind of fibrous materials are important because this fiber morphology also presents a platform to the adhesion of pathogenic microorganisms, which could lead to serious infections. For example, in these images you can see how different kinds of bacteria can produce biofilms on polymeric fibers. These fibers were made from polyester specifically. The experimental procedure basically were carried out in two stages. First, the precursor solution was prepared during the dispersion of nanoparticles for 60 minutes in ultrasonic bath. And then adding the amount of polymer related to the established concentration. And second, the fiber production was carried out in a cyclone machine based on force spinning technology, which is spinned with two nozzles, a collector nozzle distance of 15 centimeters, runtime of 5 minutes. In an environment at room temperature and relative humidity around 60%. In addition to the chemization step, a glass slide was used for the material collection, as it shows in the right upper image. Instead for the manufacturer or the map manufacturers, a square metal device was used, collecting the fibers of 7 cycles. Regarding the result, In this slide, you can observe the influence of nanoparticles on the fiber morphology for both polymers systems. Concerning PDLA, the left images, it is observed that the fiber on the ternary system present a surface roughness similar to that observed in the ascent of nanoparticles. Based on this result, it could be considered that the surface appearance is mainly determined by the nature of the polymer solvent combination. In relation to the fiber uniformity, thinning points are evidenced, possible due to the heterogeneous distribution of the nanoparticles along the fibers, as well as the pseudoplastic characteristic of the polymeric dispersion. In the uniaxial stretching process of the polymeric fluid, the molecules are forced to align themselves in the direction of the applied stress. However, when the fluid is elastic, the aligned change tend to relax to some the original non-aligned conformation, a behavior that could counteract the formation of homogeneous fibers. Due to that characteristic of the ternary system, it could be inferred that the phenomenon described had an influence of the fiber appearance. About PHP, right images, the incorporation of nanoparticles have a greater impact on the fiber surface appearance compared to PDLA. Based on previous optimization phase, as I commented in the experimental methodology, the ideal condition for obtaining the scaffold was selected. In the SCA images, the three selected systems are presented. As regard PDLA, fibers were mostly homogeneous with some small defect, probably due to the characteristic of precursor solution. As already described, the fiber have a rough surface morphology, characteristic of a PDLA chloroform system. Regarding the fiber diameter dispersion, this was presented in a slightly wider range than that obtained in the optimization phase. It should be noted that these results reflect the variability involved in the preparation of the scaffold, because these are obtained with a collection of fiber for 7 runs, and the optimization of the system were done with the fiber for 1 run. In relation to PDLA, the micrograph shows 2 systems with different concentration of ZINC oxide. As can be observed, a higher concentration of ZINC oxide promotes the formation of the fat and regularity of the fibers, as well as a higher roughness. These characteristics produce an increase in the fiber diameter dispersion. Finally, the scaffold presented porosity above 80%, which represent an advantage for the application. Through elemental mapping of zinc and phosphorus, it is identified the presence of both nanoparticles in the samples, observing more agglomeration points for zinc oxide. This is due to the tendency of these nanoparticles to form agglomerates from a certain concentration. It is good to take into account that these nanoparticles is 2 times smaller than the hydroxyapatite nanoparticles. Apparently, the polymer matrix presented a higher affinity for hydroxyapatite, reason why a better dispersion of these nanoparticles was observed throughout the fibers. Regarding the thermal stability, a decrease comparable to that presented by the system obtained at 5% of zinc oxide was observed in the ternary system of PDLA. As can be seen, despite the fact that hydroxyapatite slightly increased the thermal stability of fibers, the zinc oxide in the ternary system completely counteracts the effect of hydroxyapatite, producing a degradation equivalent to the system formulate only with 5% of zinc oxide. Different publications attribute this behavior to the fact that zinc oxide promotes transesterification at the polymerization reactions of PLA. Unlike PDLA, the thermalizability of BHP ternary system was not significantly affected by the incorporation of nanoparticles. Just a slight decrease in the degradation temperature was presented in relation to the blank. Regarding the scaffold compositions, in the case of PDLA, through analysis of residues, was identified that the final concentration differed from the established concentration, behavior that also occurs in binary systems formulated with zinc oxide. The table shows in detail the estimated residues and the real one obtained at 600 degrees Celsius, which could reflect a heterogeneous distribution of nanoparticles in the polymer matrix, mainly produced by zinc oxide due to the evidence presented in the previous elemental analysis. Also lost or nanoparticle in the fiber production process, or combination of both behavior could be produced the PDLA system. In relation to BHP, unlike those of PDLA, they reflected a concentration closer to that expected. Regarding the phase transition experienced by the PDLA, the figure shows the DSC thermograph of the heating cycle. In these systems, it is typical to observe on the first heating an indeterminate transition that occurs followed by the glass transition temperature of the polymer. This behavior denotes the presence of a certain alignment of the polymeric change produced by the uniaxial stretching that the polymer fluid experiences in the spinning process. In the ternary system, this transition occurs at slightly lower temperature compared to the rest of the system. On the other hand, during the cooling and second heating cycle, only a second order transition, typically of an amorphous polymer, was presented, which shows a marked decrease due to the incorporation of a mixture of nanoparticles. Regarding the phase transition presented by PHP, the first heating identified two endothermic peaks at approximately 48.3 and 169.8, corresponding to the melting of the crystalline phases of 4-polyhydroxybutyrate and 3-polyhydroxybutyrate, respectively. Regarding the effect of the nanoparticle mixture of the polymeric matrix, at 1% of zinc oxide, there is an increase in the percentage of crystallinity, which is indicative of a higher structural order. In contrast, at 3% of zinc oxide, two endothermic transitions occur, one at 162.1 and the other in 164.1 degrees Celsius. This behavior could be related to the formation of two crystalline phases with different lamellar characteristics, where the crystals that melt at lower temperature are the ones with a less perfect crystal structure. In the cooling cycle, a reduction in the temperature and enthalpy of crystallizations is evidenced by increasing the concentration of zinc oxide in the mixture of nanoparticles. The delay in the polymer crystallization process is possible caused by interference in the packings of the polymer changes in the second heating process. Two melting transitions appear and a decrease in the melting temperature of the generate crystalline phases, which a more pronounced effect in the ternary system formulate 3% of zinc oxide, possibly due to the presence of agglomeration. In the figure, the antibacterial efficiencies of the material evaluate with its aureus strengths at different concentrations of nanoparticle is presented. It is observed that the incorporation of hydroxyapatites produce a decrease in the crop inhibitions of bacteria. A study of the effect of hydroxyapatite in its aureus strengths shows that hydroxyapatite promotes bacterial growth, which is why hydroxyapatite would be producing a kind of screen effect in ternary system, which interferes with the antimicrobial performance of zinc oxide. Antimicrobial activities is a parameter established by the Japanese standard C2801, used as a basis for conducting the antimicrobial study. It serves as a guide to identify if a material can be considered antimicrobial due to the impact produced by hydroxyapatite. The only ternary material that presented an antimicrobial activity close to the established value was PHB, zinc oxide 3% and hydroxyapatite 5%. Regarding the biological evaluations, a pre-blood cell viability test was determined. This technique evaluates the mitochondrial metabolic activity of the cells. In the figure, the cell viability of the designed scaffold is observed in relation to the positive control. Regarding the influence of the type of polymer, it was evidence that the PDLLA promotes a higher metabolic activity than PHB, with viabilities above 80%. In addition, it was observed that from day 5, there is an increase in the cell viability of both systems. This behavior could be related to the adaptation period of cells to the fiber environment during the first 3 days of interaction. Once the cells have adapted to the environment, they begin to carry out their specific functions, such as growth, proliferation, and migration, which result in an increase in the cell metabolic activity. In addition, the viability above 100% suggests that the positive control cells were close to their confluence, therefore not significant changes in their metabolic activities for days 5 and 7. In contrast, the scaffolds, by offering graded surface areas and adequate porosity, allowed the cell to continue proliferating. For the study of the influence of nanoparticles on the cell behavior, a representation of cell viability was considered based on the blank. Regarding PDLLA, no significant changes in cell viability was observed, which means that the nanoparticles in this system are not exerting cytotoxic effect on the cell. Regarding the PHB, it was evidence that an increase in the concentration of zinc oxide in the ternary system promote greater cell metabolic activity, despite the opposite behavior observed in the binary system at that concentration. Given that hydroxyapatite in the binary system did not show a significant impact on cell behavior, and taking into account the screening effect of hydroxyapatite observed in the antimicrobial study of ternary system, it could be inferred that the combination of nanoparticles are exerting a synergistic effect that promotes an increase in cellular performance, which is more pronounced by the day 7. Finally, as a conclusion, we have the surface morphology of PDLLA ternary systems, unlike the PHB, presented a homogeneous roughness throughout the fiber extensions. Those morphologies of PDL morphology was more attractive than the PHB for the application. PHB exhibited better thermal stability in the presence of nanoparticles. On the contrary, in the case of PDLLA, the zinc oxide possibly had catalytic effects on the polymeric degradation reaction. The scaffold antimicrobial performance was affected by the presence of hydroxyapatite, obtaining a growth inhibition of S aureus strength of 85% and 98% in PDLLA and PHB systems respectively. And regarding the biological properties, the PDLLA promote a better cellular response than PHB. Thank you for your attention.